Uh, all right. So let me bring up the text here. I'll share a little bit what's going. This week's Torah portion is a double Torah portion. We're completing the book of Leviticus this week with two Torah portions. Morning, Janice. Okay. Hey, Tony. Sure do. You mean in Fort Myers?
Yeah.
It's a classmate. Oh, great. I will. I will. Yeah, he's a classmate. And our fathers are friends. Remind me of the class. Okay, so there's the Parsha overview. We have the first of the two Torah portions we're going to read, which is really going to be our way into the discussion we're going to have today about questions. Is on the surface of it, of what the Torah is telling us. It tells us that at Mount Sinai, and it specifies that it was at Mount Sinai, even though everything really was at Mount Sinai at that point. God communicates to Moses the laws of the sabbatical year in Israel until today, even though it's not biblical today. Every seventh year, the Torah tells us every seventh year to let the land lie fallow. And they don't, and there's a whole structure for this. Every seventh year, called the Shemitah year, in Israel till today, with the chief rabbinate, how they structure the farms and the produce. If you want to go to Israel as a tourist, you should always go. The tougher year in finding the food and the restaurant that's going to work for you may be the seventh year, because you got to see, oh, this one works for Shemitah, that one doesn't work for Shemitah. It's a pain in the neck a little bit, but it's still always good to go to Israel. This is not a Shemitah year, so go and enjoy your falafel and what? Last year was no, 2 years ago Shemitah. Okay, so here it says that on this Torah portion is the primary Torah portion to talk about Shemitah. And it says, and again, I'm sorry, we don't have the screen up here to read, just look at the books. It says, every seventh year, all work on the land should cease, and its produce becomes free for the taking for all, human and beast. Now, just as the Torah itself lays out pretty explicitly, think about it, in an agricultural society, to tell people that now they're not going to harvest the land, so that's how am I supposed to eat? What am I supposed to do with my business? If I'm selling apples, certainly I need to eat. This is primarily an agricultural society. So at one level, the Torah describes this as a year of resting for the land, for the land to re-energize itself. It's like it's Shabbos. But then it's also, though, it was a tremendous exercise in faith and trust for the Jewish people to say, I'm going to go with this and assume I could be able to feed my family and live. And it ended up historically being a tremendous exercise in reinforcing people's faith in God, because as the Torah predicts, every sixth year would be a bumper crop. So that there was not seventh year. And actually more, because they weren't going to plant the seventh year. So what was going to be the eighth? They needed for a couple of years, actually 3 years, it says. There was 6th year was always a bumper crop. And that's what we find in our history. It was something that people had to exercise their trust, and the Jews were always able to had enough, even in an agricultural society, to have this. Now, there was every 7 years, there was a Shemitah, and every 7 Shemitahs was a Jubilee year. 49, the next year was the 50th year. It's the Jubilee year. That's the whole where the idea comes from. And that was also a Shemitah year. Now, in the Shemitah year, we're not going to talk about this today. Part of it was a suspension of debts. So you had to work out, and the Torah itself says there's something there. Borrowing money is part of a functional economy. The Torah is not commanding us not to have a functional economy, but the Torah also wants to remind us about the fragility of human loans, debts, and so on, and reliance, and to be able to recognize that yes, I have people I'm a debtor to, but ultimately I have to think about God. So there's a structure to allow society to move on with
people still do it in Israel?
with the debts.
No.
Shemitah, they do it, but there's the rabbinate has kind of a situation where they sell the fields to non-Jews, some of it, but Shemitah is a big deal in Israel. I mean, for much of the population, it's a very big deal. And any restaurant you walk into in the Shemitah year is going to have a sign, Shemitah, which rabbi they're following. It's a lot of hoops to jump through. Yeah,
they sell their land.
That's one of the things that the chief rabbinate has as a structure, to be able to enable the farmers. It's not considered a biblical not. It's the biblical Shemitah, the biblical obligation of Shemitah was only when we had a temple. But we're careful about it, and it's for Jews, even observant Jews who've grown up in this country. Being there for Shemitah is an eye opener. And I say that for me too, because this is stuff I read about, studied about, but I never practiced until I'm there Shemitah. So there's a whole category of laws we're not going to talk about today, but yeah, it is a big deal.
Some of the kibbutz were created by socialist Jews, which were not very religious.
Correct.
And the agrarian kibbutz.
So not everybody is forced to follow Torah in Israel. We're
one question, you said you can't touch the field, so you cannot plant the seeds and all that.
Correct.
But if there is an apple orchard, you're not actually touching the field, just rip the apples.
You can take the apples off. I can take the apples off my apple orchard. The difference is that you can also take the apples off my apple orchard because they're ownerless.
I see. So people from the cities descend.
Yeah, exactly. They had it easy. They didn't have to go to the farm stands anymore.
Beautiful.
Okay. So just to get through the overview, it says 7 sabbatical cycles are followed by a 50th year, the Jubilee year in which the work on the land ceases. All indentured servants are set free, and all ancestral estates in the Holy Land, which was another category. I didn't want to get into that because I want to get to where we're going today, that have been sold, revert to the original owners. The Torah portion Bahar, which means at the mountain, also contains additional laws governing the sale of lands and the prohibitions against fraud and usury. A lot of the commercial law prohibitions, guidelines are in this week's Torah portion about fairness in commerce. The second Torah portion that we're going to read, the final Torah portion of the book of Leviticus, says God promises that if the people of Israel keep his commandments, they will enjoy material prosperity and dwell securely in their homeland. But he also delivers a harsh rebuke, warning of the exile, persecution, and other evils that will befall them if they abandon their covenant with him. Nevertheless, even when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not cast them away, nor will I ever abhor them, to destroy them, to break them a covenant with them, for I am the Lord their God. The parasha, the Torah portion, concludes the rules on how to calculate the values of different types of pledges made to God in the midst of tithing produce and livestock. So now we're going to get into questions. Now, questions is, we all know what questions are because we all ask questions, but the caliber and the approach of questions can be very, very different. Two people can be asking questions, and they can be of a very different caliber. Sometimes it's a statement with a question mark at the end, and sometimes it can be a rhetorical question. And just for example, in my mind, this past Thursday, we, as Hal knows very well, he's been working hard on it. We have a major plan going before the town at the Rabbinical College in Morristown for development on our property across the street from the college. And, there's going to be public impact and people have questions, and that's fine. Some people, so I met with a neighbor on Thursday who lives near the college. He's a Turkish Muslim guy. And he wrote to me and said, please come by for coffee. We can talk. I want to hear your questions. And he said he had questions. So questions are good. And when I met him outside, and I saw the personality and the approach he had. And then we went to speak, and I was taking notes. I thanked him because he actually had genuine questions. It wasn't coming with darts or arrows disguised as questions. I said, it's a pleasure to talk to you. It's great. He said, I know it's not everybody at the planning board hearing was coming from this opportunity. They don't want it to happen, and that's what they're asking questions. So I just want to know, and I have concerns. Genuine questions, information gathering questions of people who are open to hearing the answers and actually want an answer. Those are very, very healthy questions. There's a saying that someone I heard from years ago, whether, I'm not saying this is ex cathedra, so to speak, but said that those who have faith, there are no questions. To those without faith, there are no answers. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that someone who has faith has no questions. But the idea is they know where they stand. They're trying to learn. That's great. Questions are great. In no religious setting should a question be a problem, because the question is looking for more information. It's a deepening of understanding. But if someone comes and saying, I don't agree with this, and I'm going to prove to you that you're wrong because I'm asking questions, those are questions that are not designed to be answered. The mind is not there, not positioned to have a resolution and say, oh, my initial approach was not correct, and therefore I'm going to rethink my approach. Those kind of questions, as I was discussing this guy, it's a waste of time for both people. I don't want to have those kinds of conversations. Productive ones, 100%, and I learned a lot, and I hope he learned a lot. That's the way proper interplay should be. We're going to talk about the nature of questions, and that comes up from this week's Torah portion. So just to look at the Torah portion itself, which is on page 1A. I'm sorry, page 66, text 1A. And this is how the Torah portion begins. God spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, saying, speak to the children of Israel, and shall say to them, when you come to the land that I'm giving you, the land shall shall rest a Sabbath to God. In other words, an entire year, as I discussed before, we leave the land fallow. You may sow your field for 6 years, and for 6 years you may prune your vineyard and gather into its produce, not just those things. In other words, work the land, because it's yours. In the 7th year, the land shall have a complete rest, a Sabbath to God. You shall not sow your field, nor shall you prune your vineyard. Now, that's the law of Shemitah. Now the Torah goes one step further and says, you should count for yourself 7 sabbatical years, 7 years, 7 times. In other words, there are 7 sabbatical years, 49 years, and the days of these 7 sabbatical years shall amount to 49 years for you. And you shall sanctify the 50th year and proclaim freedom for, they were their slaves, not slaves like we used to seeing through looking at Kunta Kinte, but they had servants throughout the land for all who live on it. It shall be a Yovel Jubilee for you, and you shall return each person to their property, and you shall return each person to their family. This 50th year shall be a Jubilee for you. You shall not sow, nor shall you reap its aftergrowth, or pick the grapes. You had set aside for yourself, and the land shall then yield its fruit, and you will eat to satiety and live upon it securely. Okay, so that's the Torah portion. Now, directly after that, it says, and they specifically put it in separate text, then it says, and when you say, not if you say, when people ask, what do you mean we're not going to work our land for the 7th year? What will we eat in the 7th year? We will not sow, we will not gather in our produce. So they're asking a question. Now that question obviously can come from different perspectives. It sounds a little bit like challenging the mitzvah, but the Torah doesn't say if you say. If it's considered going to be a question that's challenging, the Torah is assuming that Jews are always going to push back. But because it's not if, it's when, if you look at the Hebrew. When you say that, and we're going to talk a little bit about the nature of the question. And know then that, so God says, I'm preempting your question. I'm predicting your question, and I'm not even saying if I know this question is going to be asked. No, then I will command my blessing for you. God says, don't worry about it. I got you. In the 6th year, there's going to be the great blessing, and will produce produce for 3 years, and you will sow in the 8th year, and while still eating from the old crops until the 9th year, until the arrival of its crop, you'll eat the old crop. That's what God tells us, and that's what in our history we're told, because obviously this is going back thousands of years, the Jews lived with. Now, we have a couple of questions here. And as we've seen, this course is going through the Rebbe's analyses of the commentaries of Rashi, who's the primary commentary in the Torah, in understanding the depth of his approach. But through this, we're going to try to come out for some moral or internal lesson for ourselves in how we approach life and how we see it. So there are going to be 2 questions here. Text 2. One question is from a great rabbi, Safat in the 16th century, or Moshe Alshich. He says it's worth paying attention to the wording. When you say, what will we eat? This verse seems out of place. It really belongs earlier, right after the command, you should not sow your field. Not here, after the text has been interrupted by other matters. So the Torah says, and you can go back and look at it if you'd like, in text 1a, the Torah laid out the law of Shemitah. Then it says about the Jubilee. And then it says, and when you ask, what am I going to eat in the 7th year? And 8th year. What Rabbi Alshich says, the question belongs right after Shemitah. What does that have to do with Yovel? That just adds to it. It's why does it wait? We're talking about not a question we're going to have every 7 years, not every 50 years. And when the Torah inserts that question in that, God says, I know you're going to ask, doesn't say when at the end of every 7-year cycle. It inserts it once we've spoken about not the 7-year cycle, but the 50-year cycle. So the question is, why does the Torah wait for that to insert the question until the end of the situation with the Yovel, the Jubilee? Now, and text 3 is what I was talking about before. It says, and when you say, this rabbi from the 19th century says, I will explain that there's a difference between the word in Hebrew, ki and im. We're not going to get into the Hebrew of it now. The word im, when the Torah uses the word im, it means if you will ask. That indicates uncertainty. The word ki indicates certainty. And here it says ki. In other words, when you will ask. Therefore, the fact it does not say im tomru, if you will say, the conclusion is that they will certainly say this, for God knows their inclination and they're destined to say so. So now, how does God know that? And what are we talking about? Why does he use that language? Why is it said in a more definitive way? So now I want to get into a little bit about questions that we know from our Seder. We're going to talk a little bit about the Seder today, even though we're well past Pesach. We talk about the language is 4 sons. It's 4 children. The Torah frames it as sons. In other words, a child asks a question. We have them in the Seder. Why do we have them in the Seder? Because there's 4 times in the Torah that God says, when your child will ask you, and then there's actually 3 times when your child will ask you, and the 4th is, and you shall tell your child. So our rabbi said there's 3 different types of questions, and there's a 4th of someone's so disinterested they're not even going to ask a question. That's we present that in the Seder as the one who doesn't even know how to ask. So there's 4 different types of quote unquote questioners, including a non-questioner. So we have 4 different types. Let's take a look at Rashi, text 4. And the language is your child asks you, what is this? This is the question of the simple child, referred to in Nagada, who does not know how to pose his question in depth and asks a general question. If you saw something in the street, or there was a sudden phenomenon, something that's unusual to you, and you say, what's that? Sometimes it's saying, what is that? You really want to understand. Sometimes that's weird. And it's not with an interest in trying to figure out the nuances. It's just, oh, this is odd. It's a statement, this is odd, but not necessarily looking for depth of an answer. And therefore, what is this? Just in a general way, we say that's the one of the simple child. It just says, this is odd. I don't know what this is. It's not a sophisticated question. It's not necessarily looking for a sophisticated answer. And that's why we say it's a simple question. Elsewhere in scripture, it says, a child will ask, what are the testimonies, the statutes, the judgments? This is the question of the wise son. In other words, it's a sophisticated, developed question because you're looking, the questioner is looking for a substantive, fleshed out answer. There are 4 different types of questioners. So the question, the Torah spoke, this is Rashi saying, that regarding the 4 questioners, the wicked one, the one who does not understand to ask, the one who asks, and the one who asks in a wise manner, because they're 4 different types. The wicked, wicked's a strong word. They're the one who's saying, I'm asking just because I'm trying to challenge, not because I really want an answer, which we know what that means. What that is. So the Rebbe, in going text 5, he said it's generally understood that the phrase the Torah spoke regarding 4 sons refers specifically to the mitzvah of telling the story of the Exodus on the night of Passover. When I tell you, if we speak about it, say, is there a time in Judaism you say that questions are the theme? I think all of us would say the Seder because we have the 4 questions we ask, and we have the 4 questions and these 4 different questioners. The Rebbe points out that in the Torah, they're not necessarily talking about Passover at all. God is saying when your child asks, and it's actually coming after mitzvahs that have nothing to do with Passover. Passover is a time when there's a focus on questions, but Torah focuses on questions. And the idea of different questioners is not peculiar to Passover. It's part of life. There are different ways of approaching a concept, and the spade or the tool we use to try to either uncover information or to smack down the information. So it's generally understood that the phrase refers to Passover. In other words, the questions of the sons all relate to the commandments of that night, and to the fact that the Torah instructs us to respond to each son according to his temperament is only in the context of Passover. So the Rebbe is saying that's true in the sense of the halachic approach to the Seder. That interpretation is indeed correct according to the halachic approach to the Seder, because that's the way how we structure our Seder. But in just looking at the verses, in the simple meaning of the verses, if you're studying the scripture, it doesn't have to do with the Seder necessarily. The question of the simple child is not about the mitzvah of Passover. It's about the mitzvah of redeeming the firstborn, which is it's not a mitzvah of Pesach per se, and it's not a mitzvah of the Seder at all, as that is the subject immediately following his question. Likewise, the wise son, in the plain sense of the text, doesn't talk about Passover. It's just talking, what's this deal with mitzvahs? We have different types of mitzvahs, ones we understand, ones we don't understand, and he's trying to understand the complexity of Torah understanding. Accordingly, the Rebbe's point to this is to say, whenever we encounter a question in the Torah about a mitzvah, we must ask which type of son is speaking here. In Torah life, in life in general, but in Torah life, I want to say, when there's a question, we have to ask ourselves, what's the source of this question? It's not necessarily a question born of doubt or weak faith, nor one that must be answered to secure the questioner's observance. Sometimes it's a challenge. Sometimes it's out of uncertainty. And sometimes it's just looking for more depth. It can be the question of a wise son whose goal is to simply to clarify and understand the details of the matter, just like the wise son's question in the Haggadah. In a relationship that matters, there should be curiosity. Knowing, to understand what makes the other person tick, what interests them, what bothers them, what scares them, what inspires them. If it's can be born of an understand of an attempt to try to understand, to deepen a relationship. If I love Torah, then asking questions questions could be meant to challenge the existence of God, or to challenge the veracity of a mitzvah, or to say, I'm not so sure about it, explain it, which is a fine question. Or it could be say, I want to understand this more because I want to connect with it more. So the wise question is not just in the Haggadah. It's a question, it's a tool. All of these are possibilities for us and how we approach our spiritual life. Do we have questions? Do we use questions? Because questions themselves are a certain sign. The curiosity is an indicator of something. It's an indicator of interest. So in text 6, this is from Rabbi Dr. Jonathan Sachs, blessed memory. He writes that this is on page 73. The 4 children are a vignette of the Jewish people. One asks because he wants to hear the answer. A second asks because he doesn't want to hear the answer. He just wants you to hear the question. A third asks because he generally doesn't understand. A fourth does not ask because he doesn't understand that he doesn't understand. There's the lack of a question. If I'm in a conversation, and even here, really, when there's a question, it's an indicator to me that someone's connecting with it and they want to understand. But people ask the questions are inspiring enough. Questions are a good thing. Questions can also be it meant as a I would not call it a negative thing, but it's really counterproductive. We're talking about there's a scale, and here we're talking about the idea that the questions can be a very good thing. A fourth, ours has never been a monolithic people, as he says. So when God says, when you ask, how am I gonna live? We have to consider that could be a challenging question. What are you talking about? How am I going to live? My field goal. How am I going to live? I'm not stupid. I've been around the block and I know how economy works. I can understand someone asking that. Someone saying, "Really? What am I supposed to do?" Genuinely, or it can be we say, "Tell me how this works. I want to understand. God told us to do this. I want to understand the interplay. It's a field. It's my apple orchard. And God's going to intervene somehow, not skeptically, but try to understand, try to draw closer to the idea." This is from the Rebbe in text 774. By placing the verse, and when you say, remember, we started going into the scripture. It said the Torah tells us that there is the Shemitah. Every 7th year, you're going to let the lamplight follow. Then it goes into Jubilee. And then it comes back and says, and when you ask a question, and we asked, why does that get punted to the end of the topic? It should have said, and if you're concerned about leaving the 7th year fallow, here's my answer. So the Rebbe's perspective was that by the Torah placing that statement, that when you ask, when you say, that how am I going to live? At the very end of the entire discussion, after even the laws of Jubilee, the Torah makes it clear that this is not the question of a wicked son. The Torah is making it clear that this is not a challenging question. There could be challenging questions, but the Torah is not saying that that's going to happen necessarily. It might. And I'm sure through our history, many people said, what? I don't believe this. How could this possibly be okay? When the Torah says it, it says it first of all, not if, but when, and does not mean to say it as a challenge, to present it as a challenging question. Saying there will be those amongst you whose doubts, not the wicked son, let's finish this, whose doubts must be corrected to ensure he fulfills the mitzvah of shvita. It's the question of the wise son. And that's indicated by leaving it to the end. The wise one lets you finish. Hears it out and says, oh, wow, now I want to understand. So the idea of this is another Torah value. If I really want to understand and I really respect what's being said to me, even if I don't understand something, let them finish. Maybe something will be resolved. And at the end, if I'm talking, a doctor is telling me something about a guidance from me or an assessment, for me to jump in and say, this doesn't make sense to me, so that's a little simplistic. Just let them finish what they're saying. And then ask the questions, because the questions couldn't be very good. But the idea is first to hear it out. So the Torah indicates by placing this question, which is not a bad question, and it's not seen as a challenging question, it's seen as a wise question. It's seen as a good, healthy curiosity of relationship. It says the Torah puts it at the end of the topic to indicate that this is someone who's letting the Torah speak itself out, to say and then ask a truly information gathering question. Having just read God's promise, the land will then yield its fruit, and you'll eat to satiety. The wise son wishes to understand the specifics of the blessing, because the Torah already said it's going to be fine. So why is he asking? Because the wise question is the wise and questioner is saying, it's not that I don't believe it. I love this idea, but tell me how it's going to work. So in what manner will God's blessing unfold during the years when we neither sow nor gather our produce? Is it going to be manna falling from heaven? What's going to be? After all, it can happen in several ways. So the idea of the question as it's presented here, and again, the Torah presents, generally speaking, 4 different types of questioner or non-questioner. But in this week's Torah portion, it's about a question of connection, a question of genuinely trying to understand the other and connecting to be able to connect deeper with the concept. And the Torah's answer is that the blessing will take the form of abundance. The earth will produce such an increase in the 6th year that it will suffice for 3 years and it will yield produce for 3 years. So to take this back to Rabbi Sachs, he says, if you look at the Haggadah, using that as a springboard for questions for the entire year, 4 verses serve as the basis for what's quote unquote the 4 sons of the Haggadah. He says, education is not indoctrination. It's teaching a child to be curious, to wonder, reflect, inquire. A child, I remember reading somewhere else, it's not a Jewish thing, but someone who was ended up being an accomplished scientist, said every day by the dinner table, his mother would ask, "What questions did you ask today?" Not what did you learn today? What questions did you ask today? Questions, curiosity is a tremendous thing. And Torah wants us to be curious and wants us to ask. And the Pesach is a time of exercising that, but it's a consistent thing. Like I say, in every relationship, you never want the curiosity to die. It is a teaching the child to be curious, to wonder, reflect, inquire. The child who asks who becomes a partner in the learning process. He or she is no longer a passive recipient, but an active recipient. Because that is what the wicked son of the Haggadah does. Ask not out of a desire to understand, but as a prelude to walking away. If you want to understand, That's great. We never want ask questions just as a challenge, and you're not really open to hearing an answer, is wasting everyone's time. I remember when I was a student at the yeshiva in Maristan, and I met on Fridays we go out and we bring mitzvahs on the spot for people on the go. So I used to go to in West Orange, and I met a young man who was Jewish and involved in Jews for Jesus, and I knew about it, but I hadn't really had any personal interactions at the time. And we had a conversation. He put on tefillin, and then he gave me some literature. So I was polite. I took it, and then in the car ride on the way back to the college, I started reading, and he's saying, oh, Isaiah, Jeremiah. It's like he's saying this that my Torah is supporting and speaking about Jesus. Now I knew it didn't speak about Jesus. It couldn't have. It was from before, but it was supporting the thing. It took me back. Like, whoa, you know, I never heard this. So I went up immediately as soon as we got back. Went up to study hall. I looked at the verses and context and so on, and all my questions were answered. I got it down, and as a matter of fact, it was good for me because after that I really invested myself in the New Testament and in the Quran because I wanted to understand more about it. But had a more secure, maybe out there I was asking questions too, trying to understand. I felt much more secure. It's not just this is right because it's mine. This is right because I can compare them, and I'm comfortable with this. But one thing I learned, which has made me think of it, is that, and this boy eventually told me, the boy I was with, he eventually left Jews for Jesus, and he told me a little bit more about how they operate. Every question he asked, because I got to know him pretty well, and he came to my house for a seder. Every question he asked, I would answer, and he would move on to another question. He never sat to think about the answers. And later on, years later, he told me they have something they call the Rolodex. That they're taught that you ask a question and if they come up with an answer, go to the next one. Just keep throwing questions. Don't sit around waiting for answers.
The text, what the quote from Isaiah in the school,
Yeah.
was it correct translation?
No.
It was not correct
No.
translation. So it was their own version of Isaiah.
I'm not going to say some of the mistranslations I find hard to see as simple, well-intentioned mistakes. Some of them I can understand. It's a mistranslation. If I yeah, with my Russian and the ability to use a Russian dictionary, if I tried to translate a letter from your grandmother to you, I can tell you for sure that I'm not going to get it straight. Because first of all, it's not my language. Second of all, you have your family lingo, and I'm using it in a very sterile way. I'm using a dictionary to try to understand. The translation is not an easy thing. So they're coming from outside the family, they're going to go tell me what my family document that I've had for 300 years is. It's silly. So some of these things, and I won't try to tell them that. You think I got plenty of questions about the New Testament. I've studied it. It's not my business. Go ahead, knock yourself out. It's fine, but it's not. I don't. They have their tradition. I'm going to leave it alone. But don't come tell me about my tradition. So it's actually mind-boggling that it has had such good marketing for thousands of years. But it is what it is. But actually, recently we had a boy from Warren, it's one of our Hebrew school kids, and thank God this worked well. He was at work, someone who was very a friend of his, was not Jewish. I got very into Jesus and the Testament, and he had questions. And this is he's a kid. He went to a Jewish day school. He went to Kushner for a few years, and it was bothering him. And he said he wants to meet, and I said, of course. I just want to ask you: are you here to try to prove me wrong? Are you coming to try to prove me wrong? Or are you trying I don't know, are you here to ask real questions because you want to hear answers or because you want to try and prove me wrong? He said, no, I want to hear. Because so we sat for a couple of hours, and I told him I don't want to be. He came with his friend, and I said I don't want to be respectful to you. Go ahead, go to church, do everything it is, but you looked in a Jewish guy. I got to work with this. And thank God, he Mendel's in touch with him, and he's I'm not saying he's observant Jew today. He said, but he's done with that. So it's not. But I'm saying the main thing is what I'm talking about is the approach. The approach is one we want to understand, and I don't want to waste my time. I stopped wasting my time with people who just want to give me a Rolodex. They're not asking me a question because they want to know what the verse in Isaiah is saying. They're trying to get me. And if I'm saying it doesn't mean that, okay, so what about Ezekiel? What about Jeremiah? I don't have time for that in my life. But if someone really wants to know, I'll spend hours.
I had the same experience that was married about a month ago. And there was, I think it was a minister.
I don't know if people online, because you were in Memphis months ago, and the minister.
He was reading the Bible, and he got in conversation, he started telling me about Isaiah and mentioning about Jesus. And I said, it's at best, it's misinterpreted. At worst, it's translated improperly. And he went to other topics, and it started pleasant, but then he got really, he lost patience with me, and just, your mind is closed, I can't talk to you.
This is it's the question is really the open-mindedness and whether and sometimes we're not open. I wouldn't pretend to be open to hearing certain things because I'm done. If I want to learn about Islam because I want to learn about Islam, not because I'm open to adopting it. Right? I got to be honest. What? Yeah. When Torah was given to us by God way before Jesus. There's the church across the street, Millington Baptist. I've had a very good relationship with them for 35 years, and they're great people, and they help us, and we help them. All's wonderful. There were a few years they asked me to speak to their religious school about Old Testament Judaism, and I agreed. But what I asked them they said is, I don't want to get into theological debates with your students. Because if they ask me a question, I'm not going to let them think there's no answer. So again, if they can ask me questions about Torah, but if they're going to start challenging me about Jesus, it's not going to be. I don't want to dissuade them, but I'm not. There might be a Jewish kid in that class. I'm not going to walk away without answer. So we had a deal. They only asked me questions about this, not about challenging me or anything. And so we went for like 2 years. The third year, a kid asked me. He said, how can you ask me? How can you not believe in Jesus when every psalm ends with "in the name of Jesus, the Father, the Son, Holy Ghost"? So I looked at the youth director. I said, "We had a deal." He says, "You don't have to answer." I said, "I can answer. You want me to answer?" So he said, "Go ahead." So I said to the kid, I said, have you ever read Psalms? She says, "Yes." I said, "In Hebrew?" She said, "No." So does anybody in this class read Hebrew? No. So asked the youth director, "Do you read Hebrew?" No. Have you ever read? Has anyone in the building ever read Psalms in its original? I don't know. So I said to the kid, "Believe me, if you read Hebrew, you wouldn't even ask that question. It doesn't need an answer." They never invited me back for that. It's just fine. I mean, we're very good friends. That happened 25 years ago. But it's ridiculous. The Torah talks about Jesus, the King David. It doesn't make no sense. And so I don't even understand how it had any legs. Okay. All right. Okay. So the first is that we seek genuinely to learn not to doubt, ridicule, dismiss, reject. But that is what the wicked son of the Haggadah does. Ask not out of a desire to understand, but as a prelude to walking away. Second is that we accept limits to our understanding. Not everything is intelligible at any given moment. There were scientists at the beginning of the 20th century who believed that virtually every major discovery had already been made. Right? I heard someone wanted to close the patent office in the early 1900s because everything's done. not suspecting that the next 100 years would give rise to Einstein's relativity theory, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, Gödel's theorem, proof of the Big Bang, origin of the universe, discovery of DNA, and the decoding of the human genome. In relation to Torah, there were many German American Jews in the 19th century who could not understand Jewish prayers for return to Zion, and they deleted them from their prayer book. They called Germany was the promised land. These facts should induce in us a certain humility. Not every scientific orthodoxy survives the test of time. Not everything in Judaism that we do not understand is unintelligible. The very features of Jewish life one generation finds difficult. The next generation may find the most meaningful of all. Faith is not opposed to questions, but is opposed to the shallow certainty that what we understand is all there is. So this brings us to a certain conclusion of the idea of what the Torah is teaching us here. The Torah is saying, presents a situation that is unusual. It would be irrational to think that after 6 years, as I'm going to read Maimonides, and I don't know today's science of it, to see that a land becomes progressively weaker every year of crops. So the 6th year, it's weaker than the 5th year, the 4th year, and the 3rd year. And in the 6th year, there's going to be enough blessing, enough crop to last me for 3 years. It doesn't make any sense. It's supernatural, but it works against logic. So the Torah presents this, and then presents a scenario that there will be a question, but a question, a good probing question, a question to say, oh, wow, but how is this going to happen? How is this going to work? It's a wise question. It's a spiritually sophisticated question, and it's a good question. And that's why the Torah doesn't say, if you ask. It says, I hope you ask. I hope you want to understand more about me. That brings that to a certain pulse. The Rebbe took this into a more spiritual sphere also, so we'll finish that off for a couple of minutes, see how he looked at it. In text 9a, the Talmud tells us, Talmud describes civilization as lasting 6,000 years, and then the Mashiach will come. And so there's 6 millennia, and the 7th millennium is a millennia of Mashiach. Mashiach doesn't come earlier. So the Talmud tells us, just as the sabbatical year abrogates debts at once in 7 years, so too the world abrogates its typical existence for 1,000 years in every 7,000 years. As it is stated, and God alone shall be exalted on that day. And it states in a psalm, a song for the Shabbos day, meaning a day, 1,000 years, that is entirely Shabbat. And it says in an explanation of the equation between 1 day and 1,000 years, for 1,000 years in your eyes, the psalm tells us, are like yesterday when it just passed, and like a watch in the night. So just in plain English, the Talmud is saying that metaphorically, we can see every millennium as like a day in God's eyes, and therefore, just like or a year, obviously compacted. It does say like a day. Saying the Talmud saying could be like a year, considered like a year, just like every 7th year, there's 6 years, and the 7th year is a rest. There's 6,000 years, 6 millennia of the work we're going through now. We've been going through our civilization, and then there's Mashiach is like the Shabbos of history.
So, for 1,000 years will be a Shemot for 1,000 years.
So, you mean, and there'll be another one? You mean?
Then another 6,000.
So it's interesting. The Kabbalah talks about that it's actually, but it doesn't mean that we're going to go back to the hamburgers and fries as we have it now.
So the 1,000 years.
It's not. If you want to delve deeper into the writings, it's not for this conversation. It's not time. It's that, in other words, we go from the normal structure of being bound by the laws of physics as we are now into a world. Actually, what the Talmud says there is that it's destruction. Doesn't mean bad. It means that our framework is gone, and now we're into a totally divine soul type of framework. Even if it's within a body, it's a total connectedness with God. You have a godliness coursing through your body right now. You just don't know that.
So Mashiach comes, it will start the messianic times.
Correct.
Which will change the whole world.
Correct.
And are we going to be corporal bodies?
So that's a debate between Maimonides and Nachmanides, but the Mashiach comes. Maimonides says very clearly the world will not all of a sudden change in a that there's no longer a tree and a ShopRite.
Okay.
Said there will be freedom and spiritual freedom, and there'll be will be able to will be free of more of the ego and the negativity that we have. So he puts it in the language in his book of laws. First, he says there will be no more oppression, and so it describes it more as life as we know it, but more pleasant. Then he moves further, and it seems to be like there it goes in epics where there's more supernatural connection. I'll send you a link. Okay. So here, the next one is from Nachmanides. It says, here we are exposed to a great secret, one of the profound mysteries of the Torah. The secret of the world's errors is linked to in this passage. Incline your ear to hear what I am permitted to reveal of it, because Nachmanides is one of the first, or if not the first, classic commentator of Talmud and scripture who also brought in Kabbalah. In the manner I'm permitted to express it, and if you are worthy, you will understand. I have already written in the section of Genesis that the 6 days of creation correspond to the 6 millennia of the world. And the 7th day, which is called a Shabbos to God, corresponds to the future era that will be entirely Shabbos. Mm-hmm. That's the language of the Talmud. It's Yom Shekule Shabbos. That next epoch is like entirely Shabbos. What does that mean? Shabbos, we don't work. Shabbos there's more spiritual connectedness. For the great name of God, as I just taught. And the 7th day would say a song for the day of Shabbos, for the time to come, which will be entirely Shabbos, and rest for eternal life. Thus, it's a time of peace and tranquility. Thus, and it could be beyond time. Thus, the days of creation hint to the original formation of the world, or the years of the Shemitah cycle allude to the unfolding of world history. Okay, 1 second. Let me just get this out of the way a second. All right. Now, if that's the case, so you take a look. This is something. Look now. We said the 6th year is something which makes no sense. The 6th year, it says when it should be weaker, it's going to actually increase its yield and grow stronger and it lies fallow. That's the way Maimonides puts it, right? And that's what the Torah told us. So there's the question that comes of what we eat in the 7th year comes in. This is where that comes in. Standing in the 6th millennium. We're in the 6th year now. If you look at the scope of history, we're like in the 6th year of the cycle of the Shemitah. When the land is weaker, we're spiritually weaker. And now we're waiting to go any day into the Shemitah year of rest. Due to generational decline, we're weaker than those before us. And we ask, how can we right now draw down the redemption and bring about the 7th year? The Rabbi is saying metaphorically, just like they would say, how am I going to live in the 7th year when there's no, we're in a weaker state, the 6th year is in a weaker state, we're not going to have the crops. We don't see ourselves as able to go into this idealistic year of living without working the fields. We can ask ourselves, Mashiach's on the coming. That's the 7th year. Why? Why would we merit that when the people before us didn't? God answers and promises. I will command my blessing. When we do the work of the 6th year, the work of exile, carried out with self-sacrifice and a commitment that goes beyond logic, God grants blessing from above. If you just do the work, and God will, you follow, and God will take care of you, like God took care of us in the 7th year of Shemitah. So the planting of the 6th year, even though it is a weakened field, will nevertheless be blessed with God's blessing. Our task is simply to act, without calculating obstacles, to value and use time to the fullest. Then we'll realize what the verse says, I, God, will command my blessing to you. Okay. So this is the Torah teaches us, using this avenue in the value of well-intentioned relationship strengthening curiosity of questions, and the Torah puts it as it will happen because the Torah wants it to happen. That was in Shemitah. But now, and the Rabbi brought it also, should for us to be able to look and say, God is telling us that there's going to be an ideal world just around the corner. And it's okay to ask. Someone's going to ask up and say, it doesn't make any sense to me. They can ask that too. And I would understand it. But the premium question is to say, to ask, like yes, show me more I can read about this so I can understand it. Not because I'm skeptical, because I want to understand. Yeah.
What is the exact meaning of Rambam? I noticed that they've got Nachmanides and Maimonides both.
Rambam is an acronym for Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon. So I imagine Maimonides, Maimon was his father. That must mean son of in some language. A generation after him, actually a century after him, there was a great rabbi, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon Nachman.
Mm-hmm.
So the acronym is Ramban, and he's called Nachmanides.
Okay.
So, and they are two well-known giants. And actually, when it comes to the whole Mashiach thing and how things will go after once Mashiach comes, they have a famous theological debate, although they didn't debate each other they're in different generations, but whether or not we will be souls and bodies, which is what Nachmanides posits, and that aligns with Kabbalah. Chabad will go there too. And Maimonides says it'll just be souls. Yes. The question on yesterday's Torah portion. Go for it.
About, but now Judaism passes through the mother, but it used to be through the father. And why and when did that change?
I don't think it meant to say go through the father. Through the father was the tribe. Okay. The Jewish central Jewish identity was always a much matrilineal thing. I mean, if you show me what you're talking about, yeah. But the tribes were a big deal, and that was patrilineal. And even today, the Kohen Levi goes through the father, but the essential Jewish identity goes through.
Oh, okay. I'm going to go back and look.
I'm telling you.
I'll bring things forward more than corporal body because you mentioned that
you believe that there'll be souls in the times of Mashiach, not corporal bodies. Yeah, you can hang your head on Maimonides. He's good. That's the logic.
You said that we're all going to descend to the Holy Land. Holy Land will be enough place to have all the dead souls and the life.
There's no such thing as dead souls. Huh? No such thing as dead souls.
Well, the souls that will be resurrected.
Yeah. So how are we going to have enough space in Israel?
Yeah, if there will be souls, that would make sense.
You're worried about the physics of it.
But the physics will change.
Okay, you're right. Wish everyone a good week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
There we go. We're going to do express service now.
Thank you.